Task Force. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Lisa Clark. I'm the Director of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I'm excited to be serving as chair for this task force created by executive order by Governor Whitmer not too long ago. Gesundheit, Douglas. We're excited to be kicking off this first discussion. So it is Tuesday, July 9th. It's a little bit after 1 o'clock. This is our first meeting. We are primarily, as you can see from the agenda in front of you, going to talk a bit about what brings us all here together, do a little bit of grounding and introductions as a starting point. And then we'll have a couple of presentations from the Michigan Public Service Commission from Chairman Tallberg and Commissioner Scripps to do a little bit of stage setting for future conversations of this group. So what I'm hoping we can do in the first part of our discussion here today is I'd like to have everybody give an introduction of themselves and why they are particularly interested in the UP Energy Task Force. And I'd like you to focus on some of the things that Brandy and I talked to you a little bit about in the calls ahead of time. What type of information do you feel like the task force needs to receive together in order to drive to a couple of our deliverables? So as was set in the executive order, the task was laid out for us to look at energy disruption challenges to the Upper Peninsula with a final report in March of 2021. A shorter term report is due March of 2020 around potential propane disruptions to the Upper Peninsula. So those, of course, are a couple of things that were laid out in the executive order that we'll be focused on in particular. So as you're thinking about your introduction, I'd love for you to think about what type of information it is that you think we as a task force need to receive together in order to drive us to that goal. So after we do welcome and introductions, then I'll talk a bit about our mission as set forth in the executive order and also do a little bit of ground setting in terms of rules of the road for the task force. So that's the agenda prior to the break. And then we'll take a quick break and then come back to some presentations and questions and answers from task force members. Just to set the table at the beginning too, all of these meetings are open to the public, so we really appreciate those of you, public, who have joined us. There are cards that are available if anyone is interested in giving comment. We'll ask for public comment at the end of our session here today. We're also interested in comments from the public. If you don't feel like standing up and saying anything necessarily, we also would appreciate written comments. So would be glad to take that as well. And we'll have a website to share with you soon as another place to receive comment and make sure that we're having a dialogue going forward. So before we get too much into the mission and ground setting, what I'd like to do is go around and again ask all of you to do an introduction and share a little bit about what brings you to the table here today. So as I mentioned, I'm Director of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. I think from the governor's perspective, she is interested in making sure there's a robust discussion about potential disruptions to the Upper Peninsula. And so I'm hoping Eagle can be here not only in the chair role, but then also as a resource to all of you for the information that we need to gather in the course of our discussions, for what you need in the course of actually the kind of day-to-day of running the task force. And then also we'll be, our team will be acting as kind of compiler and crafter of the report. As well. So as two versions of the report, a March version and then a March 2021 version as well. It seems crazy that we're talking about March 2020 and March 2021, like they're just around the corner, but they really are. I guess you'll see a little bit from the commissioners in terms of what I thought was important to start at the outset. And then I'm looking from all of you to understand what you need to see. And then I'm also interested in what you think about geography. We want to make sure that we are robustly engaging the citizens of the Upper Peninsula. And so we've been thinking about a series of listening sessions between September, October, and November. So as you introduce yourself, I would be interested in what type of information you want this group to hear together. And then also be interested in geography and where you think we need to do that. Sorry, Chris, you're stuck right next to me. Unfortunate, I apologize. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it off. Maybe we can start to my right, Dan, just so that Chris doesn't have to be right on the spot.
Oh, cool.
If you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what brings you to the table, what you think we need to have on the table, and then how we think about geography as a group. That'd be great.
Thanks, Director Clark. I'm Dan Scripps. I'm a commissioner with the Michigan Public Service Commission. I serve on the task force as the designee of Chairman Sally Talberg. I am interested in, well, I've been sort of studying UP energy issues in different roles for the last 7 years, probably in an intentional way, and longer during my time in the House before that. I come from northern lower Michigan, not a UPer, but the regional issues of those who live sort of north of M46 are important to me and have been for a long time. I am interested in how we get a future that tackles both the immediate challenges that are associated with potential propane disruptions, as well as the longer term issues. Unfortunately, I think the UP energy system writ large has been in the news regularly in the past several years, and there have been a number of steps taken, positive steps during that time, but with challenges, and the folks who live here know those all too directly on a personal and monthly level. And so really taking this opportunity to both focus on the immediate issues and then the larger issues that are at play over the next year and a half. In terms of the information, I think, it starts, I'm not an engineer either, not a UPer, not an engineer, so twice unlucky, but I think focusing on sort of the systems as a systems approach and the interconnections between propane, electricity, gas, and other energy sources, and really taking that sort of systems level at a granular level to then understand some of the policy implications and then how you craft solutions. And then finally in geography, I couldn't agree more. I think, the UP is often lumped together, but it is a big place and it is a diverse place. And I think making sure that we get around as a task force to listen directly to the people in the communities in the UP is going to be important.
Good afternoon. My name is Sally Talberg. I'm the chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission. I'm joining you today for this meeting to give a presentation on the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board that existed from 2015 until 2018. Some of the studies that were conducted, and we'll present on that later. Commissioner Scripps is representing the Public Service Commission on this task force. I would just note the commission doesn't regulate propane, but we do have responsibilities related to energy security and energy emergencies. So these issues, we've often been involved historically and even monitoring pricing and other information related to supplies. And then on the issue of affordability, it's also something near and dear to the commission and core to our mission to ensure safe, reliable, accessible energy services for Michigan residents at affordable rates. And we know there's challenges and look forward to this group's exploration of different alternatives to best address those issues related to affordability, particularly those on limited incomes or fixed and limited incomes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Kuchever. I'm the general manager for Cleveland Cliffs, Michigan operations. Engineer by trade. I've been with Cliffs for about 11 years now. Prior to coming to Cliffs, I was 23 years electric and gas utility. So I worked for about 9 years with Northern States Power Company and then managed a municipal utility for about 15 years. Was actually recruited into Cliffs in a new position that they had created as an energy manager because the issues had gotten so important to both the UP and our operations in the UP. Some 3 years after that, was hired into the general manager role and have been managing the operations here since. Really, what's my vision of what we want to see as a committee? Most of everything that we read publicly is strewn with emotion and maybe it's not fact-based. I've kind of always lived in an engineering world where we live by the mantra, no decisions without data and no data without analysis. So fact-based data of demand side for all of the utilities, existing supply options, both short-term and long-term. And hopefully in ferreting through all of that, we can come to the right conclusions or right recommendations for the health of both Michigan and the UP. Importance to us, I say my My personal tilt is twofold. Obviously, we are a very energy intensive industry. I think we're the second largest electrical consumer in the state. We have a very large natural gas load, and we utilize propane for an awful lot of our ancillary services. We do compete in we do operate in a competitive world. You know, we are a 24/7 operation when the economy and the markets are good. We're fighting for market share, which is driven by cost during other times. So very important to us. And then just as a resident of the UP, obviously, we look for quality of life for all of the residents of the UP, and affordability and availability of all of the utilities are important for that. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Ratajski. I'm the Executive Director of the Upper Peninsula Construction Council, and that's a labor management group here in the Upper Peninsula. We work with 11 different apprenticeship training programs, and we have about 3,500 to 4,000 members across the UP. We're engaged, as I mentioned, in the construction industry. So my interest here is economic development, making sure that customers that demand the power, as the speaker before me mentioned, have the power available to them, that folks that might be looking in our region have the power and utilities available to them as well at an affordable rate. And also, I think that a lot of people, I think some people think that we can't build things or do things without sacrificing the environment. And I think that there's a balance there, that we can have jobs and also have the environment as well. So again, appreciate being on this group and want to thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Prusi. I'm the director of the Governor's Northern Michigan office. I came to this task force because my boss told me I was going to be on it. But in actuality, I have a long and abiding interest in the energy issues in the Upper Peninsula and across the state. When I served in the state Senate in 2007 and 2008, I was on the Energy and Technology Committee, and we did a pretty comprehensive rewrite of the laws governing Michigan's utilities and electric power, and with hopes that it was going to really make a big difference. Over the years, after I left the legislature, I haven't really been able to track, did the changes we make with renewable power and energy choice and the different components within that, those changes that we made, did they really have a great impact on the people of the state of Michigan, which is what we were charged to do. And hopefully, as we work through this over the next year and a half, 2 years, when we come up with some recommendations for state government, we'll be able to determine what other changes are necessary. And the information that I'll be looking for here is, how did the UP wind up with such a disparate utility rates? Why do we pay so much more than just about anywhere else in the country? And actually the differences regionally in the UP, where one supplier is so much higher than in the neighboring counties. So there are a lot of factors in play in the charge that we've been given as a task force, and I look forward to working with this group. I see a lot of skill, a lot of talent, a lot of people here with the tools necessary to make sure that when we do conclude the work of this task force, we'll have the very best recommendations possible. And I appreciate everyone joining us here today.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Brandy Brown. I'm with the Office of Climate and Energy under EGLE. My background is in evaluation, measurement, and verification. I've spent some time in energy program implementation and have always been interested in how we develop successful programs that work for folks in the UP. I've seen what those barriers are, whether they're affordability or reliability. And so that's part of my background. But my other task here sitting at the table with you today is to represent Dr. Roman Cedarsov, who could not be with us today in person. So I'm going to read a little bit from his bio. He is the Assistant Professor of Social Sciences and expert in energy policy, and his particular interests are in energy and environmental policy and energy geopolitics justice, and security. He is very much interested in mapping out a just and sustainable future for the UP. And in terms of the information he would like to gather, a comprehensive set of energy services used by all customer classes in the UP.
Great, thanks, Brandy. Let's go over here, please. Major Rogers.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Paul Rogers. Dan, I am lucky enough to be a Uper. I was born and raised in Calumet, and also very fortunate to be a member of the governor's cabinet. And I'm her director for Department of Military Veterans Affairs and also the adjutant general of the Michigan National Guard. So I actually come to this committee with no agenda, no preconceived notions. Going to be coming at it very impartially, and I am data driven also. I like to see the data. I'm an engineer by trade. Went to Michigan Tech and spent the last 30 years running research centers for the Army. So now bringing that background to this role, forgive me, the non-engineers, as I drive into data and why type of questions. But I have a kind of a focused background in consequence management, energy security, and then resilience. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Douglas Jester. I'm owner of Five Lakes Energy, which is a consultancy focused on energy, obviously enough. Based here in Michigan, though, our practice is really all over the country. My personal background, academic and professional, is in industrial engineering, statistics, and large-scale systems simulation modeling. So I'm very data-driven and analytical. I'm here principally because I am a frequent expert witness before the Michigan Public Service Commission in Upper Peninsula utility cases, representing a group called Citizens Against Rate Excess, which is an advocate for residential customers of Upper Peninsula utilities. Two other points: I reside in East Lansing and once served as mayor there, but I grew up in rural New Mexico, which, aside from some obvious differences in climate, has similar energy issues to the Upper Peninsula.
Howdy, my name is Michael Larson. I'm the Upper Peninsula Operations Manager for a nonprofit called Michigan Energy Options. We are a statewide organization. We're based out of East Lansing. However, I'm here in Marquette. I'm born and raised here in Ishpeming. So I'm happy to remain in the UP and not have to move downstate. But we come to the table working with utilities on energy optimization programs. We come working with utilities on community solar programs and helping to develop and bring forth more renewables and resiliency to local communities. So we really come from this perspective of how can we be more resilient as locals? How do we weigh local control, versus new technology and things that make sense that come together. The UP has 18 separate utilities, electric utilities. We have a handful of propane suppliers and natural gas suppliers as well. One of the things that we've thought about over the years working with utility programs is that some of those transportable fuels, propane and fuel oil, have kind of been left out of the energy efficiency mix that PA 295 had. And while I understand that's being sunsetting, is there a way that we can look at those transportable fuels to kind of bring them into the mix to add, efficiencies, to their everyday lives? And even if rates are high, that should potentially serve as an incentive to help lower usage through efficiency. And so looking at some of those pieces, how can utilities work together and continue to kind of maintain their separate identities under local control as a municipality or as a cooperative is something that we're interested in looking at. And I think coming here from a UP perspective, being here and working here, having an understanding of communities and individuals, from the local standpoint, is something that we look forward to bringing.
Great, thanks, Michael. Emily?
Hello, my name is Emily Leach with the Superior Watershed Partnership. I'm a program manager. I've been there for about 6 years now. I graduated from Northern Michigan University with a degree in environmental studies and sustainability. I'm also on the Marquette County Planning Commission. So I love the idea of a systems approach and data-driven. The Superior Watershed Partnership is a local nonprofit based out of Marquette, but our focus is UP-wide and beyond a little bit for some of our projects. My main focus with the Watershed Partnership over the last few years has been through the Michigan Energy Assistance Program and also our field crews, the Great Lakes Conservation Corps, and as of a year and a half ago, the Energy Conservation Corps. So I'm all about workforce development and trying to keep young people in the UP. So obviously electric rates are a huge factor in that, but I think we could turn it around to harness job creation. So thinking about energy efficiency and energy waste reduction and maybe lowering that demand for some of these fuel sources on top of figuring out sustainability of those fuel sources and how they will be delivered throughout the UP. I think affordability is a very large thing. So thinking about that low to moderate income bracket and just how rural a lot of the UP is in terms of the transport lines. And I guess just last thing in terms of geography for meetings, I would love for them all to be in Marquette, but I know that's being
That's
greedy.
probably not happening, Emily.
I know. So yeah, I would love to see meetings all across the UP, either end, everywhere in between. I am expecting a child any day now, so I don't know if a call-ins for these meetings is an option, but I would love to see that as well.
We'll do what we can to be accessible. Okay, thanks. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Nystrom. I'm neither an engineer nor my name is a nice Scandinavian name. You might think I'm from the UP, but I'm not. So I don't have either one of those attributes going for me. But I'm one of those trolls that was mentioned in the media here a couple of weeks ago when the governor named all of us. But I am the executive vice president of the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association. It's a statewide organization that represents contractors across the state who are trying to rebuild our roads and water lines and sewers and other utilities. So I've been involved in the infrastructure discussion for decades now. I graduated from Michigan State and jumped right into the Construction Association work. I've been with this organization in one way or another since 1993. Have served on numerous task forces, Governor Granholm's Transportation Funding Task Force, Governor Snyder's 21st Century Infrastructure Commission, the long-standing Mackinac Straits Tunnel Commission that went forever, that one meeting we had, and now honored to have Governor Whitmer name me to this task force. I think the opportunities for economic expansion for the Upper Peninsula are a big thing in my mind. With the ill-gotten Mackinac Straits Commission, I was the one that was asked a lot of the questions during that process. I was a proponent of the tunnel. I was a proponent of the concepts behind the tunnel, and I still am. And I just thought the tunnel offered a lot of great economic opportunity and opportunity for utility expansion into the Upper Peninsula. And so that's one of the things, the economic opportunities is an area that I'm going to be focused on. I agree with the comments that we have to stay focused as a task force on the bottom line of facts and data. Throughout many of these discussions, I've seen where, whether it's one side or another, it doesn't matter, there's a lot of rumors and half-truths that gets thrown around, and I really look forward to getting down to the bottom line of what is really the truth about propane here in the UP and the distribution of it and the costs and the economic impacts and the challenges that really are facing folks up here. So I look forward to hearing from folks in the listening sessions. But I guess I'd say to everybody, some folks, it sounds like they're new, and some folks, obviously, like Mr. Prusi and I, we've been in many of these things before. These things take on an emotional and even political context at times, and I'm hopeful that we as a task force can have a spirited but yet respectful conversation amongst one another, listen, hear each other out, and then come up with some very comprehensive and well thought out recommendations in the end. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Great, thanks, Mike. John?
Hi, I'm Jen Hill, and I'm third generation to fish in the UP, first generation, lucky enough to live here. And so I live here in Marquette. I'm a Marquette City Commissioner as of November 2018. And I serve on the Citizens Utility Board of Michigan, which is a new nonprofit dedicated to bringing residential ratepayers' perspective into the rate-making process for our utilities. And behind all of that, having had summer vacations in the UP growing up my entire life, the beauty of the woods and the waters here motivates me greatly. And to have the chance to represent, as I think the only elected official here, it's important to keep local governments that are struggling to get by in perspective. I'm going to bring that perspective here. We had 2 coal plants here in Marquette, which have both shut down, showing how quickly things can change. We've gone from being dependent on coal to being dependent on natural gas in the space of just under 3 years. So these changes can happen very quickly. And so I'm absolutely thrilled that we are finally having a conversation with the UP about the UP energy situation with all the residents. And I am looking forward very much to having listening sessions across this, across our Upper Peninsula. Something I did in 2016, 2017 was work with all of the UP Association of County Commissioners to try to start to have this conversation. And one of the things that became very clear is because the UP doesn't have its own decision-making process, there's literally no structure for the 15 counties to have a conversation outside of this sort of ad hoc group. It is vital for us to take that whole regional perspective. In terms of that question about information, I have actually read the state energy assessment. I'm that kind of geek. And one of the things it does is lump together the two as Michigan statewide. And when in fact these two systems have almost nothing to do with each other. And so one of my first requests is that we pull out the UP information that we already have and start to look at the UP as its own system. I think that's going to help us move faster. It's very challenging to find that information out otherwise. And I also, the other thing that's very clear when you look at the UP as its own system is, yes, we have these extraordinary high electric rates. That's what I've been working on for most of the 5 years I've been here. And when we brought the 15 counties together, folks that had lower rates were greatly concerned about the communities that had the higher rates. I think there is a UP-wide solution that can be brought together. Folks wanted to work together. That was very clear. And I think I'll add, so on that landscape piece, one of the differences is there is only pretty much one utility for the eastern part of the UP, but then when you get into central and western is when it starts to get very complicated. And so bearing that in mind as we take a systems approach. And of course, I would be remiss to not mention GermFask and the good folks of GermFask who are on the border of 2 utilities that have been leading some of these, raising awareness for some of these issues. And lastly, I'll say something I don't think anyone else has said, which is the climate crisis that we're currently in is also behind a lot of what's going on here. And so being able to bring a system to our region that can help support our communities and a clean and healthy environment going forward is going to be absolutely critical. And I look forward to us finding those ways to bring that, because with our high prices, our rate of return is going to be so much less.
Great, thanks, Jen. David?
Hello, my name is David Camps. I happen to be a Youper and an engineer, so I guess I'm lucky in that regard. But I heard a couple of engineers speaking about being data-driven. One of my sayings is data is king. You know, you got to get emotion out of a lot of these issues in order to have a chance to solve them in a healthy way. So yeah, I'd like to see some data come in, and I've been looking at this problem. I went backwards, and I said, I want to understand the fundamentals of this thing. And I've been looking at Enbridge and some of their distribution networks and Dilbit. I don't know if you people are familiar with Dilbit or heavy crude, but I don't know what's going on. It's hard to get information about a lot of the product, the quality, the quantity, and actually what's going through there, what type of crude is going through there, and what the intentions are for the future. So I think that's some of the data we need to acquire on a fundamental basis, and then propane demographics for the UP. You know, how much volume do we use in the UP? Where does it come from? What's the price of it? You know, what's the average price of that? And you know, I've been working in running a company called Blue Terra Energy for over 10 years now, and we've been doing energy efficiency and renewable energy. So I've worked with Clear Result quite a while, and we've implemented a number of programs. So that's where I'm coming from a standpoint of the last 10 years. Before that, I was an engineer for Cirrus Design Corporation in Duluth, where I designed fuel systems for turbine aircraft and piston aircraft. And then before that, I worked for Mercury Marine. We came out with the Optimax line. We burned a lot of gas. And in the late 90s, I did a calculation to see how much, you know, a tank of gas we had on a boat, how big of a cloud of carbon dioxide would come out of that. I was pretty astonished at the volume of that cloud. So I started getting more concerned about this. I started reading books about this stuff, and I got into the climate side of things. I wanted to understand it. So I got out of that, and I got into the energy efficiency. So I'm honored to be on this committee. We got a bunch of professionals. I went into the contracting business to be more effective on implementing these programs. So I haven't been in the professional world too tightly in a long time, but there's a lot of horsepower in this committee. And I'm pretty excited about trading ideas. And coming from the engineering standpoint, I want to consider all the stakeholders. I think that would be a nice, healthy thing, and get the data. What's the data? And then we get the fundamentals laid down, and we'll start launching off of that and get into our heated discussions. But I think that's one of the things we need to do. And as far as the information that's out there, I've read a number of Enbridge's reports. I read a flow report for Love of Water, I believe it's called, and oil and water don't mix. I've seen both sides of this thing. I got to tell you, this is a very complex issue from my standpoint, and it looks like it's going to get very heated. And I'm already getting some emails and stuff on my, you know, just popping up on my research. So I wrote down some concerns that I have on how I think we should get started. And communication, we're all spread out all over the state. So I think, I don't know, GoToMeeting or Zoom would help the efficacy if people had that, or we were able to work from home, so to speak, a little bit. The propane security, I don't know if there's anything to security. This is a freedom of information. All this information is, you know, available to the public, I believe. But this is a perfect opportunity to pit Americans against Americans, because this is going to be a heated issue. So we just have to be, I don't know how careful we have to be with security. And then this Dilbit thing I was talking about, that oil is got the consistency of peanut butter. And pumping that through these lines, they have to put a diluent in it, and that they pump from Chicago up to Alberta. And what happened in the Kalamazoo oil spill was that light ends evaporated off, and the heavy end, the peanut butter stuff, sunk to the bottom, made recovery of the Kalamazoo River very difficult. And if they were pumping Dilbit through line 5, you probably have to add that possibility to the worst case scenario. And that report from Michigan Tech, I'm about halfway through that right now, but on the worst case scenario. But the issue I see here is complex. We've got a lot of talent in here, a lot of horsepower. I'm pretty excited about working on this. And so I've toned down my company a little bit, some of the stuff I'm doing with my company so I can work on this. I like this kind of stuff because I'm an engineer, we get a little geeky, eh? So I'm looking forward to all the contribution from everybody and talking to all the brains in here and seeing what we can come up with.
Great. Thanks, David.
Yep.
Chris?
I'm Chris Bowman from Bowman Gas. I'm in the propane industry. I don't know if I should have said that out loud. But
I said I like the tunnel.
yeah, well, but we're actually, we're a 5th generation company. We've been in business since 1918. So I'm just hoping that, I can continue to supply affordable, reliable propane to my consumers and hopefully help answer questions and get correct data like you said, because I've read a lot of things and I think a lot of it is inaccurate. But yeah, I mean, that's basically what hopefully I can help this committee out with, and I'm honored to be on it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Tom? Oh, wait, Mike, sorry. I have a bad angle on you guys. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm Mike Formansky with the City of Escanaba Electric Department, Michigan Tech electrical engineer. Been with the city for 19 years now. And it's kind of past history, but we've kind of been at the forefront of some of the issues, not so much for this committee, but we've seen recently here. We were the first SSR in the whole MISO footprint, which kind of started off a whole series of events that we never saw coming, that every person in this room, I think, dealt with in one way or another. But that's all behind everyone in the UP, and all the SSRs are all gone away. Just looking forward to being on the committee. Like Paul Rogers said, come no agenda or preconceived notions. It's been said here a bunch of times, just interested in the data. It's just a fascinating issue, situation that is in front of us here. So just looking forward to that. Like I said, I've been with the city for 19 years. I'm a propane customer at home. I'm actually an UPCO electric customer at my home. So I don't know, touch a couple different utilities here. So as far as the geography, yeah, I agree. We need to cover the whole UP as much as we can. Some of the information, maybe not today when it seems we're mostly focused on the Line 5 issue, but down the road on the electric side, stuff that we've gone through as a city is, I'd like to see for the whole UP is, hourly load data for the whole UP, and do load duration curves and coincident, non-coincident peaks, and on from there, see what like an optimum mix would be between base load, intermediate, peaking generation, and we've done it, and Heritage has their solar, but the renewables, and UPCO in their integrated resource plan a month ago talked, they're looking at utility scale solar, and how would that come together with the traditional sources. So, and like been said here too, just thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Tom?
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Harrell, and I'm the CEO at Alger Delta Cooperative Electric Association in Gladstone, Michigan. We're a small electric cooperative. We serve about 10,000 consumers in 6 counties in the central Upper Peninsula. And we work very hard at delivering affordable and reliable energy, and we've made a lot of improvements in the past 14 years to accomplish those goals. And frankly, a lot of the things I hear discussed around this table right now, especially related to the electric industry, I think could be resolved by having a public power form of electric utility, but that's another discussion for another time. My major issues, and the reason I agreed to be on this committee, is because I have a lot of concerns about infrastructure and economic development in the Upper Peninsula. One of my favorite stories to tell, I tell it over and over again, and I think usually it doesn't register the way I hope it will, but the Upper Peninsula has about 300,000 people in it. And if you look back at the US Census, you can look this up on their website. Over the last 110 years, the number of people in the Upper Peninsula has only varied by about 10,000 people. And in the meantime, we've added almost 200 million people to this country in that same period of time. And obviously, none of them are living here. And it takes it takes people to create economic development. Another thing that's talked about around here quite a bit is, young people grow up and they love it here and all that sort of thing. Many of them do, but they go away to college, they go away to get jobs and seek out economic and other kinds of opportunities elsewhere. And it's just, I think that's one of the factors that contributes to, the sort of the lack of this kind of development that goes on here in the Upper Peninsula. On the other end of the scale, there's a lot of people that live here that like it this way. And that creates some interesting challenges because they also want inexpensive or maybe more affordable energy and other things as well. The infrastructure development, when I first moved here to the UP about 14 years ago, we had a lot of transmission constraints and other issues that frustrated us in the electric business, gaining access to markets and a variety of other things. I think one of the key elements that still needs to be addressed is an upper-lower peninsula transmission interconnection. There's been efforts to, sort of get that going or get that ball rolling, and they've been frustrated for a variety of reasons. But based on both data and economics and a variety of other things, I think it's demonstrable that that's a needed facility. I heard somebody from the Michigan Electric and Gas Association, Jim Holt from the Michigan Electric and Gas Association, speak one time. And he made a comment, and he probably didn't think about it much, but it made an impression on me. And he said, at the end of the day, economics and physics always wins the argument. And I always remembered that because I've seen that play out over and over again in our industry. And I'm glad it goes that way, to be honest with you, because I think those are the ways that we need to address some of these challenges. And through addressing them that way, we will encourage economic development and growth that will be beneficial to the entire Upper Peninsula. I just want to add this one other thing. I studied business. I'm not an engineer. I know a lot about engineering. I've been in the utility business my whole career, which is soon coming to a close. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But the fact of the matter is I studied business at a small college in Canada, but I also studied extensively at the University of Nebraska and the University of Wisconsin, electric utility specific, niche programs that were developed there for people in our industry. So I know a lot about rates and rate making and the economics of the utility business. And that's another reason why I say that a public power form of government, utilities, which would include our municipal friends and the cooperative form of business, I think is the right answer for solving many of the Upper Peninsula's utility issues. There are reports and stories for anybody that written by people who are far smarter than me, for anybody who cares to look for them, talking about how the economics of an investor-owned utility just simply do not work in our culture and environment here, or the culture and environment that we have here. And that's not saying anything bad about an investor-owned utility. I spent a great deal of my career working for an investor-owned utility. But some of the things that are necessary for them to be successful economically while still maintaining a strong focus on affordability just don't exist here. So I just put that up for your consideration.
Right.
One last comment I'd like to make. As I drive across US 2 frequently, I always find it interesting that you can't even keep a good cell signal throughout that ride from here to the bridge. And, I think that just says something about life in the Upper Peninsula and some of the improvements we need to make. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom. Tanya?
I feel like Tom set me up because my name is Tanya Pezlowski with the Michigan Electric and Gas Association.
Oh. Seriously, I did not know that.
I almost said something. I'm like, oh, Tanya, I'll hit it. I'll just let it go.
I am the new Jim Alt. I will also have profound things to say throughout this process. So I likewise am really honored to be part of this group. I have been in the energy industry working on regulatory and policy matters for the last 20 years. That's included issues at the state level, the regional level, and at the federal level. And though I am not from, I grew up in the Detroit area, I'm not from the Upper Peninsula. I'll say that when people talk about the Upper Peninsula, my gut reaction is the lakes are super cold because we came up here on vacation and I would always not want to get in the water because it was too cold, but it's beautiful. And so I should also add the Michigan Electric and Gas Association. We represent 8 smaller investor-owned utilities, so not consumers and not Detroit Edison. But we do have 4 members here in the Upper Peninsula that serve 150,000 customers. And so we want to be a partner in this discussion, obviously, are equally concerned about affordability and reliability and safety. That is the focus of what our member companies do each day. And we also have a very strong collaborative initiative that as an organization is a focus for us as well. And so we do, as some of our industry participants have ATC that runs the transmission system here in the Upper Peninsula, ITC in the Lower Peninsula, as well as work a lot with the cooperative associations and the municipal associations. So I believe that we can both bring a lot of perspective to the table during this effort, as well as a lot to learn about what all of the other members' perspectives are and what the public has to say. This is a really, really important issue for the state, and I look forward to being part of the discussion. You would ask Liesl about what things we want by way of background. I really, knowing what has been considered already, I think is super valuable. So I'm looking forward to maybe having a reading list prepared. And I'm looking for one of the engineers to volunteer to be my interpreter because I have a law degree and I'm gonna need some help. Thank you.
Tanya. Chris?
Aho bojuanin nindui magani dugs. Iabe indigenicas, Ajijuk in Nindodum, Kiwana Bay in Dunjaba. My name is Chris Swartz. I'm the president for the Kiwana Bay Indian community. I've been in this capacity for about the last 9 out of the 10 years, and I've served on the Kiwana Bay Indian Communities Tribal Council since the year 2000. I represent about 3,500 members, of whom about 1,100 live on or near the Lance Indian Reservation. In addition, I heard when I found out that I was going to be appointed to this task force, I reached out to my colleagues in the other UP tribes, and I found out that I think one of the largest consumers of propane is the Native Americans over in the eastern end of the UP. And I've talked with Aaron Payment and Brian Newman on the other end of the UP, and they're really concerned, not concerned, but they're just happy to be part of the task force and having a Native American on the task force and giving that perspective from a Native American's point of view. The Lance Indian Reservation is the oldest and largest Indian reservation in the state of Michigan. And my background, I didn't go to college, nor did I go to any trade schools or anything. What I did do is I came to the Northern Michigan University back in 1981, and I tried to go to school. Honestly, I did. But it just didn't work out for me for one reason or another. And I was afraid to go back to my father and tell him, you know what, school isn't for me, you know, because I knew I was going to get a good ear chewing. So before I went down, a friend of mine, him and I went down to the local recruiting office and decided to get into the buddy system. And we were chosen to be in the U.S. Air Force. So I was, that's where I started. I tried to go to college here at Northern Michigan University back in the 80s. Didn't work out, so I joined the U.S. Air Force. I spent a number of years in the U.S. Air Force, 5 years to be exact, and I loved every minute of it. I got to tell you that. I love being in the Air Force, the opportunities it gave me. I was able to travel the world, and it was really great. When I got back from the Air Force, I got into the Indian gaming business. Because when I was in the Air Force, my uncle Fred Dakota had started up an Indian gaming business over on the Lance Indian Reservation. He didn't have nothing to do, so he asked the tribal council for one of them gaming licenses, and he got a gaming license, and he opened up a first casino, first tribal casino in the United States in a garage on our Indian reservation. Since that, Indian gaming has become almost a $29 billion operation, and it's been a godsend to Indian country. And today, I don't think I would be here if Indian gaming wasn't come about, and it give Indians an opportunity to be heard and be part of this process and part of the government system. What I bring to the table, I think, is an opportunity to hear about from a Native American perspective. Being the oldest and largest Indian reservation here in Michigan, I'm really concerned about the impacts any environmental degradation will have on our treaty rights. Treaty rights are really important to the Native Americans that are here in the Upper Peninsula. I'm sure you've heard a number of concerns from Native American tribes regarding an oil spill that may or may not occur down in Mackinac Straits. Brian Newland, Chairman Newland and Chairman Paymont are really pushing that and making sure people are aware of the concerns. Some of the concerns that I have in regards to the pipeline is the Paint River crossing. It's in the 1842 treaty area, and the Paint River crossing, as far as I know, doesn't have a spill response plan. And if something occurs at or near the Paint River and there is no spill response plan, they're going to be dependent upon local units of government, and local units of government just don't have the resources to respond to those types of catastrophic events. So I'm hoping we can have some discussions regarding the protection and preservation and of those treaty rights. And in addition, I don't bring any agenda to the table. This is my first time I was ever appointed to any task force in the government. So I'm here to listen, learn, and to participate in the process. And hopefully I'm a good advocate and I can help everybody here at this table understand from a Native American perspective what it means to preserve some of those rights. And in addition to, I hear a lot of discussion around the table. There is a balance. There is a balance on how we can provide jobs in the UP, economic development, but at the same time, be able to preserve natural resources for our next 7 generations. Because it's not like my people can just pick up and move. Once it's gone, it's gone. So we're going to have to deal with it. So it's really important to the Native Americans here who have reserved rights and reservations in the UP to protect what they have on our own. Because like I said, we just can't pick up and move. We love this place just like the rest of you around here. I was born and raised in the UP, and the only time I was out of the UP was when I was in the Air Force. And I was in Indian gaming for about 10 years. So my calling, for one reason or another, is with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, Keweenaw Bay Indian community in a leadership role. And sometimes it is daunting, but I try to do the best I can in representing most of the people here in the UP. So I appreciate the opportunity to be at the table. Chimi Gwich, thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate all of the introductions and all of the depth and thoughtfulness that you gave to that. To keep us on schedule, we're supposed to take a break at 2, but I would like to do a little bit of our housekeeping work before we take our break, and then have some presentations. I'm excited because I think the presentations that you're going to hear, based on the comments that you put forth in the introductions, I think these presentations will really do a nice job of starting to set that table for future discussion. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Chairman Talberg and Commissioner Scripps. I gotta just agree with the comment I think David said. I hear deep knowledge with a variety of perspectives from around this table. So I'm excited about bringing that together as we have these conversations. And I liked the comment of horsepower, stakeholders, and data. Those are 3 things that I think were really consistent in terms of the inputs that are necessary as we have these discussions. The kind of things that I heard, the themes that I heard that you are listening with open ears for are the impacts to economic development, affordability, reliability, having a healthy environment and sustainability, the difference in geography across the Upper Peninsula, and then again, keeping it rooted in facts and data, which I think is something that everyone's got a real interest in. So I want to direct you to the materials you have in front of you. On top of an agenda, you also have, or under the agenda, you've got a copy of the executive order, and I want to spend just a minute on that. And then you also have in front of you a draft governance procedures document. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes on some of these procedural things. Within the executive order, as I sent to you all a few weeks ago, but I just wanted to give you one more copy and have it in front as we're thinking today about our task. On the second page, you can see the charge to the task force. So just, I'm going to read it so that everyone in the audience is aware as well. The task force shall act in an advisory capacity to the governor and shall do the following 4 items. The first, assess the UP's overall energy needs and how they're currently being met. The second, formulate alternative solutions for meeting the UP energy needs with a focus on security, reliability, affordability, and environmental soundness. This shall include, but is not limited to, alternative means to supply energy sources currently used by UP residents and alternatives to those energy sources. Third, identify and evaluate potential changes that could occur to energy supply and distribution in the Upper Peninsula, the economic, environmental, and other impacts of such change, and the alternatives for meeting the UP's energy needs in response to such changes. And finally, provide other information or advice or take other action as directed by the governor. The outcome is a report directly around a propane plan, report outcome in 2 steps. The propane plan, March 31, 2020, and then the remainder of the report consistent with the executive order by March 31, 2021. You know, I think what I heard in the discussions to set up the executive order was really a desire to think about resilience in the face of disruption in the Upper Peninsula. So I think that, you know, we've heard themes of discussions about pipelines in the course of the presentations, but I think that it's a broad conversation about disruption, right? So if you look most recently to this winter and some of the challenges that led to the Michigan Energy Assessment that we'll hear a little bit more about in our presentations today, you know, that came out of really concerns about resilience across the state, but of course more focused in the Lower Peninsula. And then in 2013, 2014, we had some real propane challenges in the Upper Peninsula as well as broader energy challenges in the Upper Peninsula. So I think that it's important to make sure, what I was hearing from the governor's team is that there was a real desire to make sure that we're thinking about it comprehensively across the Upper Peninsula and what these disruptions might be. You know, we heard, of course, in your introductions also some mentions of energy security as being, you know, something that we all spend a lot of time thinking about as well. So moving to some of our kind of tactical challenges in front of us, just to be organized and ready. The executive order also sets forth roles for officers. So I'll serve as chair for the task force. I think we're also interested in a vice chair and secretary for the task force as well. And so we've had a couple of conversations. I think we've got some folks that might be interested. Actually, let me say, before we move to talking about officers though, let's talk about the governance procedures. So this is the first year all seeing this. I understand that. And this is also a 5-page document. I also understand that. Let me tell you, this is fairly consistent for what the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy uses for oversight of task force like this. So we used it based in materials that, you know, had operated before. So I'm just going to talk about this broadly. And I would offer that if you've got any concerns, you certainly can raise them now, or if there's anything you want to raise afterwards. What we'd like to do is make this a final version that we will work from, but wanted to put a draft in front of you today in case you see concerns. So broadly speaking, setting forth that we'll have regular meetings, requiring a structure for if we call special meetings, how you all will be notified, how the public will be notified. A comment on public meetings and records. It's really important that this all be very open and very accessible to the community, so making sure that we follow those requirements. Setting a structure for public appearances. So again, public comment is welcome. We'll be having listening sessions as well, but making sure that we're creating some guidance and structure for how we'll be receiving that information. On page 2, notice of public meetings. So how we'll be notifying all of you as well as the public. Setting a structure for a quorum, 51% members of the task force will institute a quorum. Voting, if we do voting, this creates structure. We'll call for a call of the task force. Delegation of appointments. So we've had a couple of conversations already about delegated appointed folks. So we can set a little bit of structure, but have more discussion if necessary. Vacancy would be filled by the governor, as you all were appointed here. Parliamentary authority will just operate under a voice vote, a basic Robert Rules of Order structure, so that if we need to get into a more structured conversation, we've got parameters for that. I'm hoping, given the good general nature of your introductions, that we will just treat each other respectfully and approach it that way, but that gives us a structure if necessary. Agenda, on page 3, you'll receive an agenda ahead of time, and certainly would appreciate input on that. And we'll be recording the proceedings, so there'll be minutes so that we can make sure that we're being communicative with folks that aren't here. Around officers, we'll have a chairperson, and then this sets forth the chairperson's duties, vice chair, secretary duties. So again, you're welcome to kind of look through this and give us comments afterwards. On page 4, what you'll see under the duties of members of the task force is going to look really familiar to you from your read of the executive order. So certainly let us know if you see anything there you've got concerns about, but it's going to look like what you read in the task force. Similarly, staff support and budget looks like what was in the EO. I apologize, you are serving without compensation. So you will receive my deepest gratitude. And we'll try to make sure that there are refreshments available, whatever we can. And then finally, on page 5, if we see the need for work groups or subcommittees, we just wanted to create a little bit of structure for what that all might look like. And the dissolvement of the task force would be 90 days after issuance of final report. So with that, are there any questions about the governance procedures? Knowing that you certainly, can reach out to us afterwards if you read through this and see anything you'd like to comment on. Yes, please, Jen.
About calling in, or that distance question, is that?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The calling in.
Calling in, sure. I think we'll try to accommodate to the best of our ability. Knowing that we want to make sure we are geographically representative, I think it could be tough to say that that will always be available. So for today, we want to do the best of our ability to do webinars, create call-in opportunities. I just think in some circumstances, we're going to be limited by the technology that's available to us. So I can't just say flat out, we're always going to do it. Northern Michigan, of course, provided a great way to do that. So we have a webinar running, we're recording, and actually, I think Roman's watching us from wherever Roman might be.
Yeah.
He is. So, so I guess that'd be my answer to that. We'll do the best that we can.
And that sounds, I think you answered for the public. I was actually thinking more for us, for the members of the task force.
So Roman's participating as a member.
Oh, right.
But he, unfortunately, we weren't able to set it up in we can't receive his input. He's texting Brandy, but we weren't able to set it up so that he could participate by phone for this. Just again, it was the technical structure of the room. So we'll do what we can whenever necessary. I would imagine, so let's talk a little bit about upcoming meetings. So what I'm imagining for an August meeting is one deep in content. You've presented a lot of things that you all are interested in. We're going to have a chance to hear a little bit of grounding. It's what's happened in the past, and then kind of where the Michigan Energy Assessment's at right now. But I'm imagining that our August session is going to be pretty content heavy for all of us. And then the way I'm looking at it is we'll do a monthly meeting, September, October, November. Maybe the morning session would be content, and then the afternoon session would be listening session. Obviously all of it being available to the public, but that being the structure for the meeting. So the reason I lay that out, Jen, is, for example, Emily, maybe you can call in for the morning sessions, but then the afternoon sessions, obviously, it might be tougher to create a call-in opportunity there. So we'll do our best to accommodate, but hopefully that will meet the needs. So yeah, great. Other questions about the procedures? Okay, great. All right, so with that, we need officers. And so, as I mentioned, I'll serve as chair. Is that the title? Let me make sure I've got that correct. Yes, chair. Ooh, see, serve as chair. I'm interested in potentially a vice chair.
Mr. Chair, I have a nomination.
You do? Why, thank you.
I do. I'd like to nominate Mike Prusi as vice chair if he's willing to accept the nomination and his body's willing to vote on his behalf.
Mike Brucey, would you be willing to serve as vice chair?
I'd be honored to. Thank you, Jenna.
Great. So with that motion, is there any discussion? Any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right, thank you, Mr. Brucey, who I will always call Senator. Sorry, it's just really hard for me not to do that. Okay, and then this other role that we have is secretary for the task force. Do we have any nominations for secretary?
Madam Chair, I have a nomination.
You do.
I would like to nominate Tanya Pizlowski of the Michigan Electric and Gas Association as secretary.
Great. Tanya, are you interested?
I would also be honored.
Great, thank you. Any other nominations? Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great.
I do
Oh,
have one
yep.
question about
Please,
that
Mike.
vote before we vote.
Yep.
So if she's the one taking the notes and she has to have an engineer interpreter, are we voting on this?
I know that I'm not even sure if it was a serious question, but I'll try to answer it.
No, it wasn't a serious question.
But the executive order says that the secretary shall be assisted by task force staff with record keeping.
Oh, good. All right,
So
good.
hopefully we can get an interpreter among that. So.
We can
Get the
definitely
interpretation
first. Great. So the other thing I wanted to mention before we take a quick break and come back for some presentations is that there were a few comments about bibliographies and materials. We are assembling that for all of you, and so we'll have something to follow up this discussion with a variety of links to materials that have been previously produced that you might be interested in seeing. So I know it sounds like we've got some really well-read folks that are already participating in the task force. We're going to try to compile all of those and get that out to everybody, just in case there might be things that you may not have seen cross your desk. Okay, with that, are there other questions from a ground setting perspective that you'd like to ask before we take a quick break and move into some presentations?
Is there any restrictions on, like if we get interview requests from the media or myself and with the city reporting back to city manager, city council, proceedings of what happened at these meetings?
So you obviously open to Public Meetings Act, everything will be open and transparent. You're always welcome to speak on behalf of yourself. I believe there's a language in the executive order that asks that any speaking on behalf of the task force is done by me or by a member of the department, I believe is how it's phrased. Does that clarify? Okay, thanks. Other questions? All right, with that, why don't we take a quick break and we'll be back here at 2:30 to get started. Thanks, everybody. Gonna clink. Clink, clink, clink.
And then
Like proprietary to Five Lakes.
we were.
Man, you wait.
No, you're never.
Okay.
I got a lot of room. I can move a lot of directions.
Foundation.
Is it wrong?
Did a version.
I'm going to learn something.
You're fine.
Yep. Hard science critical, but just.
General Rogers has made a move for Coke for everybody, which I think is a really smart idea. So next time we'll make sure there's Coke in the room. All right, thanks everybody. We're gonna reconvene. So just to kick off the second part of this discussion for today, I think that we are gonna be really well grounded in some presentations by our preeminent experts. So I'm gonna hand it off first. I know, right? This is a high bar because the crew can handle the high bar. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off to Chairman Talberg to get us going. Do you want to stand up? You don't have to stand up. I'm worried about you.
I worry about me a lot.
Why?
I will readjust if I have a problem. So
Okay.
wherever you're
I'll
coming.
just go ahead and then I can use the computer and everything. It's all set up. All right. Again, my name is Sally Talberg, Chairman of the Public Service Commission. I participated on Governor Snyder's Pipeline Safety Advisory Board that existed from 2015 until 2018. And so the purpose of my presentation here today is to give an overview, the impetus for that board, some of the work that it did, including input into technical studies that were conducted, the results of those studies, to give you a context for some of the work of this UP Energy Task Force. And the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board specifically was addressing issues related to Enbridge's Line 5, crossing the Straits of Mackinac. And this is relevant because in addition to transporting light crude oil, that pipeline also transports natural gas liquids that are used to make propane. So some of the events that led to the formation of the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board, which is affectionately called the PSAB, for those of you that like acronyms. I was recalling on the way up here the events when there was the rupture of Enbridge's Line 6B near Kalamazoo, where Brandy's from. It was the largest land-based oil spill in the United States in July of 2010. After that, there was a study by the National Wildlife Federation called the Sunken Hazard that focused on Line 5 and the risks in the Straits of Mackinac. That was in 2012. A couple years later, there was a pipeline task force that was included a number of state agencies to inform future state action related to petroleum pipelines. That task force came up with a number of recommendations, 4 of which pertain to the Straits pipelines owned by Enbridge about a year later in July of 2015. And by September, Governor Snyder created the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board. That board consists of, I'll talk about the membership in a minute, but it was created by executive order. There were 16 board members. There were 6 specific duties, many of them advising the governor on how best to implement the task force recommendations, issues related to emergency management and planning for pipelines, siting, pipeline safety. There were questions about whether the state should seek authorization to oversee the safety of oil pipelines, which is currently conducted by the federal government, and other recommendations related to state policies and procedures. The board produced a final report last December, and then it dissolved at the end of the year. The membership, as I mentioned, compared to the earlier task force, it was broader in representation, included a number of different organizations, environmental groups, tribal representation, technical experts, including academia. Shepler's Ferry was also a participant that operates the ferries in the Straits area. The state agencies involved included the Michigan Agency for Energy, the Attorney General's Office, DNR, DEQ, State Police, and the Public Service Commission. Marathon and Enbridge also participated. Marathon uses a lot of the oil from Line 5, and the U.S. Coast Guard as well. The chairs, It's a VPN issue.
Didn't actually ever show.
Oh, okay. All right. It was co-chaired by, in different forms, by the Michigan Agency for Energy and DNR, and then subsequently DEQ and DNR. There were 2 studies that were conducted by the state of Michigan, and just a little background here. So the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board provided input on the scope of these studies, issues related to conflict of interest, and the RFP documents, and had some input in terms of overseeing the studies, but they were really overseen by the state of Michigan, and specifically a technical team that consisted of representatives from the Attorney General's Office, DNR, DEQ, and the Michigan Agency for Energy. The Public Service Commission was left less involved with these specific studies and focused more on the siting recommendations related to the siting of oil pipelines, which we have jurisdiction over. So the first study was conducted by an organization that does work around the globe called Dynamic Risk, and it was an alternatives analysis for the Straits Pipeline. It covered 6 different alternatives and included a number of feasibility analysis, costs, market impacts associated with various alternatives. And these alternatives included new pipelines to be constructed that didn't cross the Great Lakes. It looked at existing pipeline capacity. Could you get more out of using existing infrastructure without the use of Line 5? It also looked at different modes of transportation: trucking, barge, rail. It looked at a tunnel, in terms of building a new tunnel and then placing a pipeline within the tunnel, crossing the straits. And it also looked at decommissioning of Line 5, as well as a status quo option. And to perform this, there were a number of scenarios that were created. These are, so as it lists, I've got 2 slides of these, and so there's 6 main alternatives. But then within each one, the consultants fleshed out specific kind of sub options. So for example, with building a new pipeline, there were different routes that were considered: a northern route through Canada, a central route via Kinchlow that actually did cross the Great Lakes, just a different part of it, and then also a southern route through Chicago. And each of these, except for alternative 2, which was to utilize existing infrastructure capacity and repurpose it to take, replace the Line 5, all of them had some option or sub-option that was considered feasible. The alternative 2 that looked at just the spare capacity was not determined to be feasible. And so they screened that one out and didn't look further into that. All right, so again, new pipeline, the spare capacity, looking at trucking, barges, rail. These were the alternative modes of transportation, because the alternatives looked at taking all the product, not just, the large bulk of the product going through Line 5 is the crude oil. The natural gas liquids that are used to make propane are lesser in terms of volume, but these alternatives didn't parse that between the propane and the crude oil. And so when you're looking at shipping, we're talking about 500 million barrels per day of product. Doing that all by truck was not feasible, and so that was ruled out. But that's not to say, it didn't really parse out, okay, well, what about just the propane part of that and trucking associated with propane? So it's just something to consider as you move forward of looking at alternatives, what this study didn't and wasn't able to cover. It also looked at a new straits crossing with the tunnel, and that analysis was completed. And then decommissioning, and these last alternatives that are listed, the last 3, on the UP, their alternative 6B-UP, those weren't technically alternatives, but they did, I think, just draw your attention to that if you're able to get into the study in more detail, because it does get into looking at propane supply to Rapid River versus, using truck and rail. So some of the key findings, as I mentioned, it talked about the cost impacts of different alternatives, and they range from less than a penny, which was the new trench, tunnel crossing, to $6.50 per barrel using rail transport compared to the status quo. So there's a range of cost impacts. I would note that these try to capture more of the steady state impacts where you get the new infrastructure and the market kind of adjusts, but there could be fluctuations where there's more price spikes and other issues in the meantime. So customers may see over time different pricing impacts. For Michigan, the cost for motor fuels specifically with gasoline is about 2.25 cents per gallon, and that equates to about $128 million per year in terms of increased costs if there were a closure of Line 5. The predominant threat to the Straits pipeline from a risk assessment was anchor hooking, which incidentally occurred in the spring and April of 2018. And the overall probability of the Straits failing, according to this analysis, prior to 2053 is 1.6%. And the study evaluated 4 options to supply the UP, and I'll talk about these in a little more detail in the absence of Line 5. The lowest cost, so the price impacts for propane were about 10 cents a gallon to 35 cents per gallon. And I'll kind of walk through how that's calculated.
I have a question. Why was 2053 chosen?
100 years from when it was put in, it's my understanding.
It was permitted in 53 by the Public Service Commission. I don't know exactly why they picked that year, but we can follow up and get back to you. Is someone taking notes? Tanya Pezlowski? Okay. All right. I'm glad we got that covered in terms of the follow-up. Okay, so the UP propane alternatives. This just kind of walks through how they looked at the cost impacts. They took the impacts on the market price and any transport costs. So if you're changing to rail, building that in, but then they deducted the current pipeline tariffs of payments to use Line 5 to get the incremental cost adjustment. Again, as I mentioned, they ranged in the UP for propane about 10 cents to 35 cents per gallon. And just for a point of reference, propane's about what, $2.50 a gallon, 2.50 cents. Is that
Today?
$2?
Today? Like today's price?
Yeah, what's today's price?
Oh yeah, that's what I was just waiting for an answer. Probably like $1.34.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've already earned your keep, Chris.
All right.
Have another brownie.
There's the data.
There's the data.
She also said have another brownie.
And just to walk through, so these were some specific configurations that could be adjusted as an alternative supply for propane in the Upper Peninsula. And the first one looks at rail to Kinchlow from Western Canada and then trucking to Rapid River. And that's about 29 cents per gallon. And again, I just want to stress that this is not sort of as the market's changing and infrastructure is being put in, that there could be more significant variations in price. The second one looks at trucking from Sarnia to Rapid River. And Commissioner Scripps' presentation has a little bit more in terms of background of where these facilities are located, and will give you more geographic context. The third one looks at rail from Owen to Conway, and then trucking over from Owen to Rapid River. Rapid River is, big producer of propane. And then finally trucking from Superior in Wisconsin to Rapid River, which is like the segment that covers. So Line 5 goes from Superior to Rapid River. And none of these so right now Rapid River is not capable of taking rail. So you only can bring in trucks. There's about a 7-mile segment where it was identified, as a potential if you were to bring rail in, and none of these looked at that. So this alternatives analysis really didn't look at taking rail directly to Rapid River as one of the options. The second study addressed a risk analysis, and it basically was trying to identify what are a set of worst case scenarios, or a worst case scenario if Line 5 were to rupture, what would happen? What would be the fate of the products, how it would be transported under different conditions, and the associated impacts with that. And this was conducted by, led by Michigan Tech University and a number of researchers from other universities and technical experts to analyze. This is about a 400-page report. Both of these reports are very voluminous with appendices and a lot of detailed information. So they modeled the transport of the product. They analyzed the implications for spill response and cleanup. They assessed the potential health impacts, ecological and broader impacts, as well as the total potential liability. And the key findings from this study, and this was released in September of 2018, an unmitigated release of about 60,000 barrels of oil caused by, it was a so Line 5 through the Straits, it's a single pipe up until then it splits and it's dual pipes over the Straits. It would be a double rupture, so both of the pipelines rupturing at the same time that the primary and secondary safety valves weren't working. And that yielded about a $2 billion liability, $1.88 billion. And then of this figure, part of it relates to cleanup costs, part of it's for recreational damages, and also lost income to local businesses was the largest share of the liability. A total of about 400 miles of shoreline could be impacted. There's 47 wildlife species of concern in that area, and about 60,000 acres of unique habitat could be at risk. I would just note the 400 miles of shoreline, they did a number of these different scenarios and then sort of tallied up the total shoreline area. It doesn't mean that you would have one spill that covers the 400 miles. And then the overall risk of fatalities and short and long-term human health effects, according to the study, were relatively low associated with a spill. The larger concern was actually related to adverse impacts to mental health, given the significance of this area, some of the impacts on the businesses and residents.
Is this the worst case scenario that they developed?
Yes. And again, it was with the double failure and the safety valves not working.
Chairman Talberg, earlier you mentioned an anchor hooking rather than an anchor strike, which is two different things, I think. But if an anchor hooked, and you said I think it was 1.6% of a chance from up until 2053, what's the percent chance of a catastrophic failure of all of the safety systems? Does it give any analysis on that, what that percentage might be?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
The task force produced a report in December. It was issued on December 20th. It provided inventory and status on a number of the different activities that were underway and the charge from Governor Snyder. And this just kind of gives you a visual of that. There were a number of different areas that they looked at: financial assurance, making sure that Enbridge is setting aside the right kind of resources in the event of a spill. They developed a number of recommendations related to siting of oil pipelines that relate to the Public Service Commission process. There was a number of different activities related to coordinated emergency response. And so this just shows what's completed, what's ongoing, and then what's in progress, the little construction symbols. And then this is the second page of that, just trying to recap, the specific charges and where that stands with respect to the executive order. And that's all I have in terms of, my prepared. I'm happy to take questions. We have a number of staff that are steeped in the details of these studies. And so, definitely can get additional information and dig specific parts. I mean, you really have to get into sort of the appendices on looking at some of these alternatives, but we can help navigate that if that's helpful. Also, Commissioner Scripps has been deep in the weeds on some of this as well. So we can take some questions now as well.
Great, thank you so much, Sally. So if there's questions, and to Sally's point too, there are a wealth of intelligent experts within the state that we can make available either in the next session or in a future session as well, depending upon where you want to go with questions. So are there any questions for Sally?
No question from me, but a comment from Dr. Cedarsoff. He was the section, or he is the section lead of the MTU report, and he'd be happy to elaborate on the report in a future session.
Oh, great. Thanks, Brandy.
Brandy, could you text back and ask Tony's question, essentially? Did they estimate a percentage on the worst case?
Yep, I'll do that now.
I would also note, and I apologize for not including this in the presentation, but all of the studies and other materials, agreements with Enbridge, public comment, just a whole host of materials are available on the website mipetroleumPipelines.com. That is a government website. It's a .com because of the functionality and the ability to take public comment, but that is maintained and available as a reference. Again, that's mipetroleumPipelines.com.
Great, thanks, Sally. And we're also going to share materials in kind of the bibliography I mentioned earlier, but that's a really important place to go when you want to read the 400-page reports. There will be a test on. I'm just kidding. There will not be a test. We'd like to make it easier. So depending upon what your questions are, that'll help us shape what the next presentations are.
And Dr. Cedarsoff has responded, no, they did not estimate a percentage of the chance of a catastrophic failure. It was not a part of the scope of work.
Okay. Thank you for doing that.
Please, Jen.
Did I see, sorry, Chairman Tolberg, did I see that the top, there was a check mark next to something that said no heavy crude transmitted under the straits?
Yeah, so light crude is transported through the pipeline line 5. There was an agreement with Enbridge some years ago with the AG's office to prohibit the transport of heavy crude oil. And I think that came out of that earlier task force recommendation.
2017 date, if I remember correctly. I was just looking at it the other day. Right? Yeah, I think yeah.
And so is that the dilbit?
That's the same thing as dilbit, heavy crude, same thing coming out of the
So it's not, so it doesn't go into the straits, but it is it does make it to Rapid River? Is that what that means?
No, my understanding is line 5 does not transport any heavy crude whatsoever. It's only light crude and then natural gas liquids, which is like the products used to make propane.
Thank you.
Does that apply to the tunnel, Chairman Talbot? To the new line, this new 30-inch line that they're
proposing? I don't believe that there's a plan to move any heavy crude through a new pipeline or the existing pipeline, but I would have to check the extent of that particular legal agreement with Enbridge.
I believe that's the case as well.
And what we were thinking for the August 5th discussion was more depth on all of the components of propane. So not only from an engineering and pipeline perspective and mapping it and understanding some of the questions that you're going to for the chairman, but then also the economics of it. So that's the direction we were thinking about for the next conversation.
The 58,000 barrels that were estimated as a worst case, how does that compare with the spill in Marshall in 2010? How much was released in that spill into the Kalamazoo River compared to what the worst case projection would be here?
I do not know. I know that the Marshall spill went just under $1 million. I don't know if detected is the right word, but it was uncontrolled for some period of time, exacerbating the amount of product that was released. But I would have to double check on the actual
That's
volume.
Definitely something we could have state experts come in and talk a little bit about. So I've talked to a lot of people on our team who spent a while on the Kalamazoo spill.
Yeah, and I think Enbridge did they spend at least $2 billion, or they're still spending money trying to clean that up?
I believe so.
I think cleanup is ongoing.
And it was just over $1 million estimated by EPA.
Just over 1 million
gallons or 1 million barrels?
Gallons.
Yes.
So at a barrel is what?
55.
55 times 58,000.
42.
Yeah, 42 US. Right?
And it was just under 1 million gallons that was dumped in the river. It took cleanup took 5 years. So I don't know what they've got still ongoing.
They actually presented at the UP Energy Summit, and the total number was $500 million spent by the fines, the cleanup. Am I remembering that correctly? I'm probably not remembering that, but it was with all those numbers. It was it's on the website for the UP Energy Summit, the presentation that Enbridge made, and they discussed the Enbridge cleanup process and the fines and the fines they had to pay to folks who lost business, and then the fines they had to pay to both the state and the feds.
Douglas?
Just for those who might not quickly translate gallons to barrels, that would mean that the Marshall spill was between 20 and 25,000 barrels. So this would be roughly 2.5 times.
In a much bigger body of water.
So understanding, Chairman Tallberg, in looking at the total product sent through the pipeline rather than pulling out the propane, was that I'm trying to figure out the relevance for us as a UP Energy Task Force. To be really parochial for a minute.
I think that
what would you suggest?
What it means is, despite having spent significant resources on a really detailed study, the scope was such, and this was, set out from the outset, that it limited the analysis of alternatives to look at moving all of the product. And so we really do have a gap in terms of what would happen with respect to propane alone, and what are the alternatives for propane alone? Because, the oil and both oil and propane have their own impacts on our economy and a whole host of other matters. But with home heating, it's different than gasoline used for cars, and so I think there is a gap in terms, and this is a nice segue to Commissioner Scripps' presentation, of really understanding from a contingency standpoint, how would we supply propane in the event that the line was decommissioned or something happened to it, that whether it was temporary or permanent, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with prices? What other supply arrangements and infrastructure would you need to put in place to ensure reliable supply, or alternatives to that?
Questions? Tony, did you? No?
Good, thanks.
Okay, great. Oh, yeah, please, David.
Yeah, I was just, when I was looking at this, and I understand we're supposed to be looking at propane alternatives here, but I wanted to go back and look at this line so I can understand the criticality of this, of the situation. And what I see there's some transparency issues with Enbridge as far as how much they transport there. I've seen multiple numbers, 65% of the propane in the UP. I've seen 55, 85. so then I started looking at the pipeline across the straits, and I was wondering what kind of sensor package. In Kalamazoo, it took them 17 hours to shut that line down, and they, in the control rooms, they were varying the pressure because they doubted the data they were seeing on their computer. So they increased the pressure, and for 17 hours, that thing continued to spill. So right away, I asked I wonder what their sensor package is. What do they see in that control room? You know, but maybe that doesn't apply because we're only looking at propane. But that's one of the questions I had. Does anybody know what those sensor packages are and the procedures for shutting down that line, how long it would take, and that kind of information? Do we know if we have that available in anywhere? I haven't seen it in the Michigan Tech report yet.
I know there are a number of conditions in the agreements with Enbridge in terms of the operating conditions and precautions, and as well as equipment to have on site, things of that nature. I mean, it kind of, I guess I look to the chair in terms of the scope of this group too. It's a pretty big task, I would just observe. And, you know, line 5, you could go off in a lot of different tangents or whatever. So in terms of trying to get information, and so you guys can figure that out.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, to the point, having a conversation about disruption to the propane supply chain, and then what that means, and how do you support the UP economy and residents in the case of that disruption, is really kind of the focus of the work that we're all here to do.
So why is there only one propane guy?
Because you can represent.
Well, I can, but I mean, that's solely what it's about.
So that is the component of the first report. That's the focus of the first report that's due to the governor in March.
Okay.
It's not solely what it's about. The task force's mission is to look at UP energy challenges for a variety of energy sources, but we were asked to report out in March on propane in particular.
Okay.
So that's a good clarifying point.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? All right, moving on. Thank you so much, Chairman Talberg. Sorry, I'm trying to talk into the mic. Commissioner Scripps, are you going to stand up?
I think I might.
Okay.
Do you know where?
I think it's. Give you all a chance to turn around. See if I can do this.
Well, Dan's getting
Perfect.
organized. We will make slides available to everybody too. So just so you know, don't feel like you have to scribble numbers quickly.
And I heard you say August 5.
August 5 is what we're thinking about for the next date.
So thanks for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to focus on the statewide energy assessment, which is a relatively light 237 pages with appendices, so nothing like the 2 reports that were summarized by Chair Talberg. And as part of that, just because of the focus on propane here, I'm going to spend more time on the propane section of the C, as we sometimes call it, of the assessment, as well as some of the lessons learned and the dynamics that went into the 2013-14 polar vortex that created an energy emergency, a declared emergency here in the Upper Peninsula as well. So for those of us who are, or those of you who are in the UP full time, you probably didn't get the fun text alert from the Michigan State Police, but those of us who live below the bridge did. And this happened at the very end of January, a series of cascading events, extremely cold weather, or at least for us, minus 25, maybe that's a nice balmy day. We also had MISO declaring a max gen event. Basically, every unit that can produce electricity needed to be producing electricity. And obviously, we've got a fair number of those who are actually now sourced with natural gas that was needed for propane or for home heating. We had an explosion at a Ray compressor terminal in the bottom left that took about half of Consumers Energy's available natural gas for its system out of commission, almost on a dime. And you had sort of all of those things happen at exactly the same time on the coldest day of the year. And so this really they curtailed commercial and industrial customers. They actually shifted, in spite of the MaxGen event, a number of natural gas fired electric generating stations offline, but we still weren't bridging it. And if natural gas fails to flow when it's needed for home heating, you basically have to go out and relight the pilots for every place that is affected. It is a massive job to do at any time, let alone the coldest weeks of the year. And so in the face of sort of a building crisis, the State Emergency Operations Center was activated, and a text alert ultimately was sent out from the Michigan State Police that a number of us got at about 10:30 at night, asking us to turn down our thermostats to 65. And it really was sort of a million plus Michigan residents taking action that kept the system working. I put this here, this was in a different place in an earlier presentation, but really sort of shows that these events, these weather triggered events, are happening with increasing frequency. So looking back 60 years to 1960, you're starting to see sort of the change, basically a new normal in what we expect in terms of severe winter weather. So between 1960, I have no idea what I did. There we go. Between 1960 and 1990, the peak average wind gust is 42 miles an hour. It's an increase over that time of more than 20%. Sorry. I'm getting used to reading notes while I'm presenting. We're also seeing 30% more extreme weather events in 2016 compared to just a few years ago. And over the past 60 years, when you look at that, 5 of the 7 highest years for this climate extremes index have been since 2005. So this increase in sort of weather-related emergencies that have an impact on our energy system are happening with increasing frequency. So 4 days after the event, on February 4th, Governor Whitmer requested that the MPSC review the state's energy supply and preparedness for emergency situations, requesting an initial assessment from the commission by July 1st, which we delivered, and a final assessment to come. We have agreed that we will deliver that by September 13th, and this is currently open for comment, which I'll talk about in just a second. The governor specifically asked the commission to review the commission's infrastructure planning criteria and methodologies for distribution, transmission, and generation, existing planning processes for electric and natural gas utilities, and best practices for integration, linkages and gaps between real-time operational reliability and infrastructure planning for long-term reliability, demand response and mutual assistance protocols by natural gas utilities and opportunities to enhance those, contingency risks, interdependencies, and vulnerabilities of supply and/or delivery disruptions from physical or cybersecurity threats, and rough cost estimates of potential enhancements, adequacy of commission rules addressing customer safety, reliability, and resiliency, and utility notifications, evaluation of existing gas efficiency programs, and identification of area or types of systems most at risk. And the idea is basically to assess the long-term adequacy of the infrastructure from a reliability and resilience standpoint, and to identify vulnerabilities and make recommendations on where we can reduce risk. So, and in this, this was essentially a natural gas emergency that had impacts on the electric system as well. But the governor really said, let's look at everything, including propane. And again, as the chairman mentioned, the commission doesn't regulate propane, as well as cybersecurity, physical security, and emergency preparedness. So really try and take a comprehensive and holistic view. So we did. We set up a web page. That's the first thing that we do. I know that we'll be doing one for the task force here as well. Divided our staff into 5 work teams. Physical and cybersecurity were combined as part of that, but all the others had a specific work team. 36 staff involved, 40 and more stakeholders with meetings and interviews and calls. So really tried and as part of this, before we even started writing, we developed a draft outline and put that out and said, anybody can comment. Are we answering the right questions here? And we got a a number of comments from stakeholders and other interested parties that we built in, and that ultimately informed the development of the report. And then now that it's out, there's an opportunity for comment over the next month. We'll listen to those comments. There's an opportunity for written comment, and we'll build those into the final report that will be released again in September. So the initial assessment is really that, you know, despite the crisis and the sort of overlapping crises, this was a good news story. The heat remained on, the power remained on throughout Lower Michigan, and so it is something where even sort of with a number of different and overlapping issues, the system worked the way that it was supposed to. But there are also opportunities to learn, and we need to, because these emergency events can have a high impact on the economy and the well-being of residents if the system ultimately were to fail. Some of the vulnerabilities that we identified in the electric system include aging assets and infrastructure, the ongoing shift in generation that's already been talked about. On the gas system, there's infrastructure issues as well, the interconnection with the electric system, system redundancy, places where we only have a single supply, which if it were to be disrupted, could have a significant impact on a large number of people. On propane, there's a number of issues. I'll get into more of these as we go, but driver shortages, infrastructure availability, propane market structure, the impact of extreme weather, that this typically happens at the time that people need to heat their homes, and what that means. Cyber and physical security. We learned a lot in this process, but security governance, cybersecurity controls. At the UP Energy Summit last month, we talked about the issue here is that, you know, we've got a pretty varied landscape in terms of who regulates what, which my uni and co-op friends are certainly parts of, and yet, you know, the hackers don't care sort of where the utility boundaries are, and so making sure that the whole system is protected and robust. And then emergency management, this was a place where we learned a lot, but a lack of consistent reporting requirements, outdated curtailment procedures, tension between gas-fired generation and home heating. What do you do when your regional grid operator says we want you to run everything that's capable of generating electricity, and yet some of those are very much you know, require the same natural gas that folks very much need for home heating. We made 36 recommendations, which we can do. We separated this into recommendations and observations. So the recommendations are things that the commission can lead on that are within our areas of jurisdiction. The observations are places where we would call them recommendations if we were in the business of recommending to others what they could do, but ideas for other folks within their sort of spheres of influence to move forward. And then again, so some of the high level recommendations: risk-based integrated natural gas planning, understanding really where the biggest threats are for natural gas utilities, developing long-term plans for maintenance and infrastructure covering all assets, including storage, distribution, and transmission. Integrated electric system planning. So we have, under the 2016 laws, integrated resource planning on the generation side. Increasingly, the linkages with transmission planning and distribution planning are becoming evident, and really trying to integrate all of those planning exercises to take a holistic view of the electric system. Valuing resource diversity and resiliency, that understanding the diversity of power supplies as we shift, and trying to quantify that as part of future IRP plans. Integrated resource planning, I'll try not to speak in acronyms. It's tough for a regulator sometimes. We also wanted to really sort of, again, connect the generation sources, transmission, and distribution upgrades as we're looking at. And near term, Jen, to your point, in terms of this is one statewide energy assessment for two peninsulas that look very different, but replacing the transmission line that interconnects the two peninsulas will boost reliability and resilience for residents of the UP. So there were places where the peninsular nature was at least acknowledged and some recommendations made. On demand response improvements, or the gas electric interdependencies I've already talked about. Demand response improvements, this is really sort of improving electric demand response design, communications protocols, there were places where we found out that the demand response systems really weren't working the way that that we thought that they would. And this is a resource that increasingly we absolutely have to rely on. It's as important as any generator on the system. So increased testing, increased notification and communication with participants. We found, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, that the Detroit Tigers were one of the demand response. They have a limited ability to shed load in January. So it's something where I think just understanding who's participating and what that looks like is increasingly important. Emergency drills, that this, having, when you're on your 4th day of no sleep and you're still in the middle of it, having gone through that practice a couple of times and having it not be the first time that you've walked into the State Emergency Operations Center, for example, can go a long way. And having utilities really understand sort of what they do as the crisis escalates is critical. Cybersecurity standards is increasingly important. Again, sort of understanding sort of the vulnerabilities in the system and how we can make those more robust. And then propane contingency planning. We recommend a formal contingency plan for the continued supply and deliverability of propane or other energy alternatives for Michigan residents in the event of a loss of current supply options. And that includes participating in this task force. And then I would also call out that there are a couple places where I think the recommendations are relevant to the Upper Peninsula. So greater transmission interconnection, which I've talked about both between the peninsulas and sort of within the MISO footprint. We are currently working on distributed energy resource interconnection standards to understand the rules and procedures for generation facilities seeking to connect to distribution grids and to better integrate those resources as part of the process. We've got a rulemaking that will commence in the fall of this year. Diversity of supply for natural gas, a number of recommendations focused on avoiding over-reliance on one source with large impacts. The Marquette connector that's currently under construction is a good example of this. And again, a number of propane recommendations. So as I said, the initial assessment was submitted July 1st. We're open for public comment. Folks can comment through August 9th, and we'll have a report, a final assessment due by September 13th. You can email written comments to mpscedockets@michigan.gov. And again, all of this will be made available or mail to our sort of mailing address. And if you do submit comments, the docket number that we organize all of our information under is 20464. And again, all of this will be made available so you don't have to remember email addresses and docket numbers. So I want to spend a few minutes just sort of walking through some of the changing nature of the Michigan Energy. It happened again. Not going to breathe, I guess. Just in the last sort of 10 or so years on the electric, natural gas, and propane side. So this, I think, does a really good, stark job of showing the shift in generation resources. That 2007, we were nearly 60% coal as a state. Today, that number is about 35%. So that is a dramatic transformation in a decade. The sources that have made up the gap have been natural gas and renewables. And that is, I think, something that we are continuing to keep an eye on. Yeah, absolutely.
Has load grown or shrunk or stayed the same?
Probably over the course of that, it's basically stayed the same. 2007 to 2012-ish, probably it shrunk some and it's grown some since, largely economically driven. We have seen some load reduction through our energy waste reduction programs, energy efficiency, but it's basically just a change out of resource mix. And we've seen it in the UP. So the Shira station was online in 2007, offline today. PIP, obviously online in 2007, offline today. There are no, as far as I know, coal units that are currently generating in the UP that are providing power to the UP. There's a cogen station in Menominee, but that's it. And when you think about where we were 10 years ago, that is a radically different. And in that time, Marquette Energy Center with 3 of the reciprocating internal combustion engine RICE units, the 7 RICE units in Negaunee, the 2 in Baraga or near Baraga. So we are seeing this, some wind development in the Garden Peninsula, some solar as well, and that's certainly shows up in some of the plans. But it is a pretty significant transformation in a very short time, sort of relatively speaking, in terms of the resource mix. In terms of gas, one of the things that sort of got highlighted over and over again is the fact that Michigan has more gas storage, natural gas storage capacity than any other state in the country due to our unique geology. Notably, every single one of those storage units is in the Lower Peninsula. So these are underground caverns. They typically held gas before. Gas has been extracted. The caverns remain there, and you can pump the gas back in and literally just use it as a battery and flip an on and off switch. You need a compressor to get it out and in, but it's there for use. What is striking to me in this, and it's not on the slide, but we have 600 billion cubic feet of underground natural storage capacity, more than any other state. And to put that in context, that our largest gas utility has a peak demand on the coldest day of the year of 3.5 billion cubic feet. So nearly 200 times what our largest utility needs on the coldest day of the year in terms of the underground storage capacity. Yeah.
But that's
all Lower Peninsula. Yes, yeah. And I wanted to flag that because it's good, but you still need to get it up here. And so some of the transmission lines and linkages to other states, but it is not as big a benefit for the Upper Peninsula as it is for the Lower Peninsula. In terms of home heating, natural gas is overwhelmingly the choice in Michigan. 76% of homes heated by natural gas, 10% by electricity, 8% by wood, or by propane, 3% by wood. And that's all I'm going to say on this slide, because the biggest piece of this is that is not uniform across the state. 18% of Upper Peninsula home heating is propane. You can see the breakdown, but in Keweenaw and then much of the eastern UP, it's more than a quarter of homes are heated by propane. So 8% across the state, 18% in the UP. It's actually about 24% in northern Lower Michigan. But this is these regional differences matter a lot in terms of how people heat their homes. There are additional assets in the Upper Peninsula. So in Kinchlow, there's a storage facility for propane. There's the Rapid River Fractionation Facility in Delta County that's up there as well. So there are some additional propane assets in the UP, but a far higher, more than twice the rate of the state as a whole heat their homes with propane. Chris, you're gonna.
Are you talking about in Kinchlow? Are you talking about plains?
Yes.
Rail?
Yep.
Rail siding?
Yeah, and it's an above ground sort of storage terminal.
Yeah, 430s.
Yeah.
Okay.
This sort of speaks more to some of those regional differences, but in the UP, again, 18% of UP households heat with propane. What's interesting here is that the Rapid River fractionator actually supplies more propane than is used across the Upper Peninsula. The Rapid River gets its propane as its feedstock from Line 5. So it is, I just want to highlight the fact that, you know, when Line 5 is operational and serving Rapid River, it can produce more than the whole of propane demand for the entire Upper Peninsula. The next couple slides are on the propane emergency, and if there are questions, I mean, obviously jump in, but yeah.
So does that mean that they're trucking propane to either northern Lower or Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's a lot probably to Wisconsin more than to northern Lower.
And he just said to the Sioux as well, to
Okay.
Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
some that goes there.
Yeah, from Kinchlow.
No,
From Rapid River.
Well,
Okay.
both actually. But
So I think all of you probably remember the winter of 2013 and 14, which really started in the fall, that we had a late, large, and wet crop harvest. So we use propane in a number of ways. We think of it as home heating. We also use it for crop drying. And we saw an increase of 450% in terms of the use of propane for crop drying because it was a late corn. And this is sort of across the Midwest. It's not just for the Upper Peninsula, but a late corn harvest that was very wet, and that sort of required in a lot more propane than we usually use. So going into and this is the graph on the right, going into the heating season, our reserves were well below even the minimum of a 5-year range. I mean, well below. So you start the core of the winter heating season with much less in reserve. We also had supply disruptions, and there were basically 3 overlapping issues. So the Cochin pipeline, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm pronouncing that right. I got my UP place names right, but I'm not sure I got that one. It was shut down for maintenance. It was scheduled. At the same time, Line 5 was actually shut down. So the core of the propane supply to the UP, to the Rapid River Fractionator, was shut down. And so the Rapid River Fractionator was offline. And so we needed to go further for UP propane. And then you had rail disruptions across the Midwest as well. So usually we get our propane in the Upper Peninsula essentially from Rapid River. It produces more than we need. You shut that down and you start having to go to Conway, Kansas, which is sort of one of the core hubs. It's the second largest hub in the country, but that's affecting everybody else. And some of the pipelines that essentially serve that were also offline, and the rail disruptions were exacerbating that. And then you get a severe winter on top of that drives up demand. So this is, basic economics. You lose a huge amount of your supply from Line 5 and the Cochin pipeline and other disruptions, and then you increase demand for crop drying and for home heating with a severe winter, and you get the price fluctuations that we saw. So these are, the top one is Michigan propane prices compared to the $2 number. Chris, by the way, is I think I spend so much time thinking about winter propane, which is I think about $2 a gallon most winters. That and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you compare what we saw in 2013 and 14, where prices were getting up near $3.75 a gallon during the peak of it, that is the price shock that people felt. And when you compare sort of what happened with the hub at Conway to basically every other hub in North America, you can see the difference. Everybody jumped, but nobody jumped like Conway. And so you combine those two things. We're sending trucks to Conway from the Upper Peninsula because of the loss of Rapid River, and they get there and they're filling up at $5 a gallon. And that is going to cause some significant hardship for UP residents.
Hey, Chris, can you talk into the mic too? Because we've got people watching, and I want to hear your comments.
Can I add that?
Absolutely.
Please.
When Rapid River's down, there's all kinds of rail terminals in Wisconsin. I don't want to hit you in the eye with my thing, but you have Owen.
Mm-hmm.
There's Crandon, Tomahawk. And then also Duluth. You can up in that area.
Superior,
so, yeah. So I mean, there may have been a few that we're going that distance, but
there are other places that were closer.
Absolutely. Yeah, we ran to Grand Rapids and to Duluth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in response, the state took a number of measures around this. So a declaration of the energy emergency, as I mentioned, that included a waiver of hour of service rules. So the time that folks could be on the road trucking, petitioned the federal government for temporary waiver of weight limits so that the trucks could each haul more than they usually were allowed to. Additional funding for heating assistance through the state's LIHEAP program. Zooming out, sort of not just propane, but are there alternatives for folks who have both a propane tank but also a wood stove? And so working with the forest products industry to find additional firewood in the UP. One of the things that was happening, and Chris, you can speak to this more than I can, I'm sure, but when you showed up to buy the propane, you had to pay cash on the spot as a retailer. This is what I was not on the commission then, but you didn't. You must have a better credit rating. But
in our industry, what you always do, like normally our suppliers force us to do it March, April. So March, April, I have to contract per month gallons that I'm going to use for that coming year.
Mm-hmm.
So companies that weren't following suit like a squirrel that stores nuts for the winter. So if they didn't contract and they were out of contract, no allocation, yeah, they probably did.
Okay.
But companies that were prepared didn't have to do that.
And I'll actually get to that in a slide or two, because that was one of the things that we've seen. But for those folks who were dealing with liquidity issues, there were some emergency loan programs that were put into
absolutely.
effect.
Yeah, if a company or whomever went into that scenario with no contracts, yeah, absolutely.
So the other pieces were really focusing on critical facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, schools, et cetera, in the areas most affected. Just advertising, it didn't come to a Michigan State Police alert, but conservation of energy, safety of backup heat sources. We saw a lot of people who were bringing their sort of, outdoor heating systems into their homes instead of, because they could use a kerosene heater. There are obviously significant safety issues with that and some real tragic consequences. Working to increase rail shipments, legal actions on those who had resorted to price gouging. And then at the commission, looking to better understand the cause of the emergency and then participating, both state and federal agencies, including with other states in terms of a regional response. So one of the things that we did, I've got 2 slides to wrap this up, but as part of the statewide energy assessment, our staff conducted a survey of the propane industry participants to gather additional market insights and data. And I want to acknowledge the assistance that was provided by the Michigan Propane Gas Association. We really couldn't have done this without them. But there are a number of things that can help to address some of the cost impacts, including sort of participation in pre-buy programs or agreements to lock in a price. So you pay the same price as a consumer, that can help address some of the volatility. We saw the median for the pre-buy program participation at 20%. The median for the lock-in price programs was 61%. And then a really significant variabilities. There were a place where I saw the median numbers 55%, but the range was 10 to 90% participation. And so it really is sort of all over the map on participation in some of these programs. The vast majority, to Chris's point, of annual supply is actually contracted. That this was one of the things that we looked at, and I think it's one of the measures that is increasingly used after things like 2013-14. But 67% of the respondents who participated in our survey contract more than 75% of their annual supply. So they've got it locked in, and they're not having to buy versus the spot market. About 1/6 contract over half their supply, between 50 and 75%. In addition to that 2/3 that contract for more than 75% of their supply. And no respondent that participated said they contract for less than 1/4 of their supply. They do it all essentially on the spot market. So I think you're seeing an increased focus by the retailers in trying to lock in pricing for putting the nuts away for winter, as Chris put it. There is significant concern about the availability of trained drivers. We only had 30% of the respondents say they currently have difficulty receiving or distributing propane due to the availability of properly trained and qualified transport drivers. But we did find that it is a top concern as you're looking forward, with approximately 90% of participants citing this as either a moderate or a major concern. One of the other things that we've seen in response to the 2013 disruptions is increased storage. That we have 25% of those who have increased storage, most participants, 61%, have increased storage in the last 5 years as a response, with 1/4 of those who have increased storage adding more than 90,000 gallons of storage, and more than half, 54%, adding between 30,000 and 90,000 gallons of storage capacity. So a pretty significant move towards storage as a hedging mechanism when disruptions occur. And then finally, 2/3 of retail companies have contingency plans for severe supply disruptions. And then finally, our propane recommendations across the board. So we found that the survey was a great way of getting some market insights in an unregulated market. And so one of our recommendations is to do this on an annual basis, similar to what was done for this report, and really helps to increase our understanding. We think that there's an opportunity with 20% participating in pre-buy programs and just over half in lock-in price programs to increase participation in those to reduce price volatility to customers. Contingency planning, so what I talked about on the last slide was contingency planning by the retail providers. This is contingency planning by us as a state, which is part of what we're doing here in the event of supply disruptions. And that could include a temporary or permanent shutdown of Line 5. And I say that, you know, there's a lot of news around this, and I would just highlight that there are reasons that Line 5 could be shut down, and they're a broad range. In 2013 and 14, well before it was a headline issue, it was shut down for routine maintenance, but during a time that contributed to a number of other factors that contributed to the energy emergency. We saw a short-term shutdown after the anchor strike, and so there are other reasons that it could be shut down as well. A comprehensive alternatives analysis is needed. This was called for by Governor Whitmer in the executive order that created the task force, and we included in our assessment that this alternatives analysis should consider the use of rail and trucks to supply the Rapid River fractionator, options for importing propane into the UP from other areas, alternatives to propane, potentially including extending natural gas for home heating, use of electric heat sources, and targeted energy efficiency programs for residential propane customers. We also are, one of our findings, the rest of these are essentially findings, is to work with suppliers. There are benefits to developing working relationships so that we know each other before potential shortage conditions, and can then sort of work hand in glove as we address those. Accurate accounting of supply and storage. We found that it would be helpful if prime Michigan propane suppliers provide our energy security section with information similar to that contained in a Energy Information Administration form to more accurately account for inflows and outflows of storage and capacity. It provides greater transparency, fewer shocks, and more time to prepare in case of shortages. Driver training was one, and working potentially with the Michigan Propane Gas Association on a hazmat driver training program to supply the propane market with properly trained and qualified transport drivers. Boosting market resilience through supply, diversity of supply and infrastructure. So that's everything from studying the feasibility of increased utilization of Appalachian Basin NGLs through new pipeline infrastructure, similar to the new Utopia line that connects a Windsor refinery with the Marcellus shale play, as well as additional in-state geological storage and fractionation capacity. So working to diversify fuel sourcing. And then on the infrastructure side, additional rail and infrastructures to serve Rapid River, including the MEDC has an economic development program that actually provides 50% of the cost of rail spurs connected to economic development projects. And so that would be one option that we specifically called out, but certainly there are others available. So I'm happy to take any questions that there are on this. It obviously is a high-level overview of a report with a little more depth on propane, but it was what we and our staff have spent the last couple of months doing.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Questions for Dan?
On your Michigan fuel mix slide where the coal was decreasing, was there a price comparison done regarding the price of the fuels based on that?
So a lot of what is driving it is economics. That I'm sorry, I can't remember your name from Marquette, but talking about the increased expenditures needed to keep some of these older coal units online, and then finding that when you build the gas units, that dispatching into the MISO market provides some pretty compelling, a pretty compelling economic case. So I don't have the comparison in terms of cents per kilowatt hour on simply a fuel cost basis, but it's one of the things that's driving it, certainly.
Okay. Thank you.
Say, Dan, backing up 20 slides ago.
Right. That would be slide one.
At the start, and I think it was slide one, with the perfect storm and this last winters, was there an assessment or I'll say a root cause found the cause of the fire at the compressor station, and then I'll say actions taken to prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, so we directed consumers to do a root cause analysis. They submitted their first report on that in May, I want to say. I'm looking at the chairman. Maybe it was April, our staff and then some other parties submitted comments on their first draft. They provided us with a response to that. And in our last commission meeting last week, just before the 4th, we directed some additional pieces that we'd like to see in a final report. So we're working on that. I think we've directed them in October to finish their work, and we will have our final report done by the end of January. That said, the end of January is right in the middle of another heating season. It's almost the exact 1-year anniversary of this issue. And so as part of our order last week, we directed them to look at, there was an issue involving sort of where the mechanics were that sort of created the trigger. And we directed consumers to look at basically every other similar facility to ensure that it's not set up in the same way. So that's a long way of saying it's ongoing. We've taken some immediate steps to make sure that we're ready for next winter, but we'll have a final report out from the commission by the end of January.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yep, Jen.
In thinking about this as contingency planning, again, that perfect storm of what happened in 2013-14, and if I may, what I sat through a presentation by Consumers Energy. What they said, this was in February at an Institute for Public Utilities at MSU. It was -25. Their emergency system tripped, and then the gas is designed, it's supposed to float away but it was -25. The gas didn't float. Instead, it got pushed by the wind over to the next facility, and boom, is fundamentally what happened. So two of their, if I'm
yep,
yeah. So the system failed because it was -25, and the gas, which was supposed to just disperse into the air when the emergency system tripped, instead was blown into the very next facility that was hot. And then the next facility, there were 3 on site. They were able to revive the first one. The 2 others were utterly destroyed. So, and that perfect storm of, you don't necessarily want to plan for the very, very worst case, right? We'd have the system that we have now where we have all this excess capacity that we're often not being able to use. So to that, around this propane issue, that makes, again, understanding really what is the demand in the UP seems really critical. This just brought that home to me. And then I wonder, was any of these resources in Wisconsin that Mr. Bowman just identified, were any of those included in any of this analysis? Because that may be a resource for us as well. I again, don't know, but that seems like a logical question.
So our assessment looked at a few of the linkages. I mean, I know we highlighted Owen as a terminal, but in terms of other states, I don't think that we did a full analysis of, and I think that's probably one of the things in the propane plan that we need to develop by the end of March with this group, but that looks at sort of where we could source. The challenge is that there are challenges that some of the Wisconsin facilities in 2013 and 14 it was my understanding from some anecdotal conversations, admittedly anecdotal, is that it was challenging for some folks to get supplies there because everybody was going there, and so then you went to the next further place and the next further place. Chris, you lived through this. So.
That's right too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it should be, and it's sort of where you draw the line in terms of what we consider worst case. Is worst case sort of seeing record high prices as far away as Kansas, or is it something that is a little more localized?
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. And thank you, Chairman Talberg, as well. I think those presentations were really good foundational discussions for today and help set up the conversation that will happen in the next meeting. So now I'd actually like to take a second and just see if we've got anybody in the audience who is interested in doing any public comment. Kimber is available from our team, from the Eagle team. She's got some cards if anyone is interested in offering public comment today. Otherwise, we'll certainly have opportunities for public comment at all the future meetings, and particularly we'll have 3 sessions focused specifically on listening opportunities. So is there anybody interested? Okay. Great. Thank you for being here anyway. All right. So before we wrap up, I've made a ton of notes about materials that you'll be seeing from all of us through email. So look forward to that. Also, tentatively at a brief look at calendars, I'm targeting August 5th at the moment and sort of toying with St. Ignace. So please feel free to let me know if there's a reason that doesn't necessarily work for schedules. We'll do our best to accommodate as many as the task force members as we can, but that's kind of a first blush. And then what we'll do over the next few weeks is work with all of you to get the rest of the dates on the calendar for September, October, November, assuming that the day is basically split up, maybe half of the day or 3 to 4 hours in the morning, content, task force work, and then the afternoon being listening sessions. And so we'll try to move those throughout the Upper Peninsula to make sure that we are giving citizens an opportunity to speak to us in local geographies. We'll also accommodate technology needs to the best of our ability to try to figure out what we can do, not only from conference call perspectives to support all of your needs, but also webinars and recordings so that we can support people that can't be with us in person. So we'll do our best there as well. You'll hear more from us about a website, about a place to receive comments, that sort of thing. So look forward to that. I guess when we did introductions too, I just want to emphasize too, I don't know that we did a lot of this. So Brandy Brown is the head of Office of Climate and Energy at the department at Eagle. And so if in the unlikely event that I'm not available to be with you, Brandy would be also fantastic connection for all of you back into the department. So just wanted to make sure I pointed that out specifically. And then also just to really embarrass people, James Cliff is sitting in the front row. He's Deputy Director, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, another great resource. Many of you are familiar with James, but just want to make sure that you've got names and faces in case you're in need of additional information or content from all of us. So with that, I think I covered most of my additional notes. I hope you found the day useful. And I'm really looking forward to the next conversation. Yes, Mike, please.
If I may,
yep.
I guess I'd like to close this out with a comment. Dan and Sally, I hope you take this the right way. I thought the presentations were very helpful. However, I want to say that I think we got to dive into this quick. I really do. And with that, between now and August 5th, I think the staff really does need to focus on some information that's helpful for us on propane in the UP. Mm-hmm. For me to see what's happening in Detroit, quite frankly, that's not why I'm sitting here. I had a predecessor that said God so loved the world that he didn't send a committee ahead of time. We can sit here and create a report that's already been created time and again, and they're sitting on shelves in Lansing all over the place. We've been tasked with focusing on energy in the UP. We need to get focused on that right away. And nothing against today. That's not why I'm saying this. I think it's going to be quite hard to get all of the information put together that we need that is specific to the UP, but that's what we need to have in front of us in order to make recommendations ultimately. And so I think we need to, I wanted to say that before we leave so that we didn't come to the next meeting on August 5th and be sitting here looking at statewide information thinking that, boy, doggone it, we should have tried to boil this down some way. But we really do need to get to the point where we're looking at UP information so that then we can make recommendations for the UP only.
Yeah, so don't disagree at all, Mike. And as you know, we felt a lot of urgency to making sure we had this opportunity to do the grounding session. And so the materials provided were really based on what had already happened, because it is important to base our work on what materials do we already have. So don't disagree at all. I also think, you heard from both Chairman Talberg and Commissioner Scripps, the propane industry is not regulated. With non-regulation comes a real lack lack of data. So what we needed to do was start with the data that we have. And so, you know, the survey that was done by the Public Service Commission as part of the statewide energy assessment is a critical grounding component. It's not enough. Nothing that we saw today was enough. We wouldn't be here if we had enough information. So I certainly agree with your comments, and you know, we'll look to dive in. The goal was to get all of us together so that we all had a chance to see each other and kind of know what the task was in front of us. So understanding that, you know, there's quite a lot of data that's going to be necessary to move us forward. Thanks. Yeah, please.
So I appreciate the comment, and I don't disagree at all. I think we have some staff that can assist with this. We may ultimately need to look at additional resources to track that down. I do think there are things that we can tease out of the work that has been done that gets sort of more specific. I tried to do that in some high level ways, but I don't, you know, that is not a substitute for the sort of granularity that you're talking about. And I agree that. I guess one thing that would be helpful, and we can do this sort of offline, and not just Mike and me, but invite any of you. But if you've got specific questions on sort of what is this? How many, you know, where are the propane customers, or what is the, you know, whatever the questions are, if we can sort of pose them as specific questions, we can probably track down the data. The unregulated nature is an issue. The industry has been very good about responding when we ask them questions, but there is a difference between folks that have to answer our questions, Tanya's smiling, and those that don't. So
20% response rate, I think I heard.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
But the more specific we can be with the questions, the more, I think, fine tune the data that we can bring back.
Madam Chair, if we're gonna, you know, focus on propane at the August 5th meeting as we talked, I think it would be good if people just threw out so that, you know, Tanya's taking notes, obviously, as the secretary. She's got the ideas here. But I mean, just helping us to understand how is propane distributed in the UP.
Yep.
You know, I've heard Line 5, I've heard trucks. I mean, obviously, there's a whole system that Chris might understand, but the rest of us don't. To see a map and to have someone explain for a half an hour at the next meeting, 20 minutes, how it's distributed, understanding the cost differences in the UP. Page 15 of this presentation has the percentage of customers that use propane in the UP. I mean, that type of stuff I think is helpful for what we're trying to get done here.
Agreed. And the plan was to start with a kind of demography of energy use in the Upper Peninsula and then narrow down quickly to propane, because while we are tasked with propane in the short term, the overall task is energy. And so I think it's important to keep it in the broad context as well. So yeah, Jen.
There's a report by Michigan Tech done a couple of years ago that also called out that 25% of homes in the UP are second homes. And so I think there's also that piece of it that I'm very curious. That's starting to get, 25% is not a lot, but does that also impact the things that we need to think about? That's a really important question.
Yeah, our survey actually tried to tease that out a little bit because a lot of folks use propane for second homes wherever they are. And we actually asked the question in two different ways to try. But again, I don't know that I could disaggregate the information to say which of the respondents were specific UP respondents. But we did ask sort of if this is your primary home and you primarily use propane to try and get at that exact question.
Tony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentations, by the way. One of the concerns that I have is we had a lot of information that probably could have been answered in this room by some questions to Enbridge, for instance. And what I would like to do is see this group at some point in time invite Enbridge to one of our meetings to answer some of the questions. I mean, earlier I was confused about, do they have heavy crude going through Line 5? That was kind of answered here, but there were some other things. Do they have an emergency plan? That, and not so much that it has to do with our end game, but some of these questions are going to be in the way until they get answered. So my request would be at some point, can we invite Enbridge to come to one of our meetings? It's Line 5. It's the thing we've been talking about for propane supply to the Upper Peninsula. So I would like to ask that they come and answer some questions that probably were unanswered here today.
Great, that's helpful. And all of you, as you're thinking about who you want to have present, please let us know. So very much appreciate that. And we'll try to figure out how to slot everybody in so that we're able to get the kind of questions answered that we need to get them answered.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Other questions, comments?
I
Yes,
have a
Chris,
comment. I
please.
mean, anybody's more than free to contact me, email me, and, you know, whatever, do the best I can.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's our point of contact, you know, for tech, all questions? Is there, who do we contact? You or
Tanya.
Chairman Talberg? Or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can use me, and actually Brandy is going to be the other great contact point for you. So you've received emails from both of us at this point. So the department would be the point of contact.
Thank you.
Yep.
I guess the last thing I'd say, Madam
Please.
Chair, is the website. If we're going to start getting all of this stuff in emails, that does get a little confusing over time. You want to look
Sure.
at it, but then it gets way down on the list. The website creation will help that. I've seen that with all of these types of things. You get that, and then you can just go to the website. I know I want to look at that report. There it is. So anything that gets emailed to us now before the creation of the website,
We'll all move to the website.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good,
Just
good.
trying to facilitate the flow of
yeah,
information.
people want to
we're-
read a 400-page report. Go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got to say, I was really impressed with the introductions at the way this group has come together. I think this is a really deep group of expertise. So I think being able to fit all these different perspectives together will come to a good outcome. We wanted to move quickly. As you all know, I mean, this task force was created in June, and you all were appointed not that far after, and it's only July 9th. So we're going to move rapidly to do everything we can to support the creation of a good outcome in March. But I think that it's really well grounded in the group of people that are around this table. So appreciate all of that. And we'll do our best to make sure we're accommodating all these needs as quick as we can. Anybody else?
Nice job.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for getting here as quickly as you did and for being such willing participants in the discussion today. So really appreciate it.
If you drag your feet
Madam
2
Chair.
more minutes, it will be 4 o'clock.
Oh man, did we get done 2 minutes early?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Jim.
Are you
Sorry.
anticipating that the meeting on the 5th is a full day session?
I am. I think we have a lot of content. I heard a lot of things come up around the table today. We'll do our best to get as many experts in front of you as possible. But I would say, I mean, if not full day, like 10 to 3, right? So
Just
chunk
for
of time.
planning purposes.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. Should we drag our feet? Is there anything else to talk about? Let's get done early. Thanks, everybody.
Do you have a gavel? Do you?
No.